As we begin, I'd like to ask Brother Glenn to lead us in a word of prayer. You know, we're looking at the problems and difficulties in David's family, but I guess just about every family has its problems. You may argue over who the black sheep of the family is. Both sides, maybe two different sides of an issue. They both call the other side the black sheep and whatever it may be. But, dysfunctional, I think was the word that was used last week. We talk about dysfunctional families today. Well, they had some of that back then where they just don't function like they should. And it can be different problems there. It can be a parent or parents who are not what they should be. And it amazes me sometimes to see things parents do to their children. And, beginning with abortion, but then also the child abuse that takes place. And it's just, blows my mind to see some of the things that people do or that they condone. But then also it can be, even when people get older, you can have a rebellious child that can cause difficulties. Whatever it may be, there's a lot of different situations that can come to play that, maybe a parent is not what they should be. They may not be abusing their child, but they're not a Christian parent and cause difficulties. But you look at the story of David, and we saw what happened with his sin with Bathsheba. He got forgiveness for that sin, but he dealt with some of the consequences. And as a result, the sword wouldn't leave his family, and God had told him there's going to be difficulties in your family. There's going to be, it's not going to be all peace and wonderfulness. And you see him lose that child that from his and Bathsheba's relationship. And then you see him lose another child that is killed by Absalom because he had raped his half-sister. And by the way, there was that act that took place as well. And so you see a lot of different things happening. And so we talked about that situation last week. Absalom had waited a couple of years, and then he saw his opportunity, invited all the brothers out to a feast at sheep shearing time, and had his servants rise up and kill his half-brother and for raping his full sister. And as a result, he is banned. He has to run for his life, and he has been banished for a while. But then he's invited to come back to Jerusalem to live. And, David allows him to come back. But you can come back to Jerusalem and live, but you can't come before the king. You can't live in the palace. You can't live like, royalty should live. Wouldn't have that relationship with his father. How do you think that would affect Absalom? I mean, he's invited back into the city, but doesn't have the contact. How would that affect him, you think? Okay, he has arrogance, and so, how dare he treat me this way? And, we do see that play out in this lesson. What else? Do you think it could hurt? Through all that arrogance, do you think he may have felt, maybe felt slighted, hurt feelings? Or not understanding, I did what should have been done because, David didn't handle the situation. He should have punished his son for doing such a terrible act, and he was upset, but it doesn't say he did anything. And I know in Absalom's mind, he handled it in the way that he thought he should. That doesn't make it right. There's some hatred there and bitterness that built to the point he had him killed. Of course, you look at the situation, David had done the same thing, covering up his sin with Bathsheba, had Uriah killed. So it what goes around, it comes back around again. You see it continuing through the next generation. But you can imagine, it didn't make the situation better, I wouldn't imagine. Right. Yeah, Yeah. So he's the one that ran out of town to save us, rather than saying, look, he should have gone before his father and said, I feel like I did the right thing here that needed to be done. And then if you have to execute me, but he ran. But then when you get invited back into town, but you're not invited to come before your father, that still doesn't make the situation what it should be, does it? That's true. He came back. He was invited back into Jerusalem, but he wasn't allowed to come. He didn't come before the king. He wanted to have an appearance before the king, and he did not, before his father, and he did not. With that, how do you think that affected him? Do you think he still felt slighted or overlooked? I mean,
I think a whole lot of it plays out. Truth, I can't remember how the brother killed, what order he was.
he was the first. He was the first one after. I think his.
He
Yeah.
may have used the rape of his sister as an excuse to kill his brother because he was heir to the throne.
That could be true too.
Whatever was going on in his mind, Satan was putting it there.
Well, he was allowing that too.
Whenever convenience came along, Satan put some bow in there, and he taught him how to subvert David and take the kingdom.
Yeah, I mean the thing is, when we're supposed to flee the appearance of evil, like Jesus said, get behind me, Satan. Realize where temptation comes from. But the point is with him, like you said, it could have. We don't know what his heart was. It very well could have been that. Well, just hatred toward him, but also here's an opportunity to get rid of the firstborn, the one that would be maybe heir to the throne or whatever, and I can get him out of the way, and it'll make it a little bit easier for me. He's willing to do a lot of things, and even here, where he's trying to make a point of, I've been wronged. What good does it do to bring me back to Jerusalem? And we'll see this in the lesson. What good does it do to bring me back to Jerusalem if you won't let me see my father? That's not any good. I might as well have stayed where I was. Well, he wasn't interested in mending those relationships. He was after the throne, and we'll see that. And so, like you say, there's some ulterior motives, and you have to be suspect on anything he did, in his reason for doing it. And so we can get kind of caught up in you look at we know the whole story, but you put yourself, a person on the street looking at Absalom, a handsome young man, and well looked up to because he fit the image of royalty, and yet we know more about what his heart and his true feelings were. It mentions in the book that you look at Saul was what kind of appearance did Saul make when he became king? He was taller than any of the people. I mean, a handsome person. I mean, he was a good-looking, tall person. If you want to pick out a king, boy, here's a good picture of what a king should be. Poster child of what a king should be. And then you look at David. I mean, he was a good-looking young man with bright eyes, and another person that maybe he was the youngest in the least family of a small tribe. But when you look at him, I mean, he was a man that was a nice-looking man, from what the scriptures say. Then when you look at Absalom, he fits that mold as well. And so, when people look for a king, they want someone to say, boy, look at our king here, And really what they should look for is, it doesn't matter what the person looks like, it's a matter of whether they're a good leader or not. But he fits the picture there, a person that people would admire and look up to just for their good looks and maybe the personality that they present to people. Look at 2 Samuel chapter 14, and you get down to verse 25. Now, in all Israel, there was no one who was praised as much as Absalom for his good looks. It doesn't necessarily say he was the best looking, but nobody got more praise than he did. I don't know, but I mean, evidently he's a very handsome person. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. Head to toe, even down to the sole of his feet, A good-looking man, no blemishes there, and people praised him for it. And as Basil mentioned, there's some arrogance there, I think, as well. I, I think he probably cherished those type of remarks made about him. And then it's kind of interesting, it puts about his hair. Evidently, he was very proud of his hair. I'm proud of what hair I have left, whether it's gray or what it's hanging in there for a while. Someone said something about your gray beard makes you look older. I go, I thought it was the bald head, and they go, well, that too. So I was like, okay, thank you. But then I actually had somebody the other day. I told them I was still 60, and they said, I thought you was older than that. And I was like, man, it just gets better and better, doesn't it? But that's okay. That it doesn't get any better on that, I don't suppose. But that's fine. At least I'm still alive. May not be kicking so much, but still alive and going. No, we understand how those things go. But with him, he evidently had a beautiful head of hair. I was showing the grandkids my picture from high school and college, and they said, what happened to your hair? Mine was as thick as Jared's is now, and just whatever. But he had a beautiful head of hair. He cut it once a year, and it says it weighed 200 shekels. Anybody know how much that is? Do what? 5 pounds. Depending on who you look at, 4.85 was what one thing said, but usually it said about 5 pounds. That's a lot of hair, isn't it? Do what? Yeah, if you grow 5 pounds of hair in a year, that's pretty fast, isn't it?
They didn't wash it off, it might not have been all right.
Yeah, it depends on what's in. It's like some of the, I've seen people with the dreadlocks get cut, and it has all kinds of stuff in there. It's like, okay, you may find stuff living in your hair that you didn't realize was there. May have lost something. What was that? Clay tried to help this fellow. We talked to this fellow one time up in Nashville. This was when he was working with a critter control business, and this fellow had the dreadlocks and all that, and the long hair, and Alan Street. He had to talk into Clay and said something about he needed some help with, I think it was mice or whatever. And Clay got talking to him. Well, he said, they live in my hair, And Clay's like, oh my, he goes, cut your hair. He said, I can't because of religious reasons. He would not cut. I mean, his mind wasn't exactly right, needless to say. But anyway, he said something. Do what? I don't know what he was, but when he finally told Clay that the mice were speaking, they speak to me at night or whatever. It's like, okay, it's time to move on. So maybe he had some mice living in there. I don't know if they spoke to him or not. No, but the point is, he had a head full of hair, beautiful hair, evidently, and 5 pounds about cut every year, and that was kind of his pride. I mean, you think about Samson and his long hair. Here he had his long hair, cut it just one time a year. Why is that mentioned? It gets him in trouble later, doesn't it? That's going to play, if you like to read books, and I like to read different novels and all, and usually there's little fact. That's where I kind of notice these little facts that are put in there, and you go, why did they put that? And I go, that's going to come to play later in the book, and it usually does. And in this, it comes to play later in the story. It's not just a matter of him having a beautiful head of hair and maybe long flowing hair, whatever it may be. It's a matter of it's going to be part of his downfall as well when it gets caught in some branches and he's hanging there and he gets executed while he's hanging there. And that's next week's story, so we won't get into that. But you get the picture. Here's an arrogant young man that's good looking, beautiful long hair, if you like that kind of thing. But he was admired by the people and just no blemish at all. And so you get that picture. Absalom was blessed with 3 sons and a daughter. His daughter's name was Tamar. Now, where do we know that name from? That was his sister. That's his sister's name. That, remember what happened before, and we said, as far as her getting taken advantage of, and then she came to live with him. Maybe it's out of honor to Tamar that he named his daughter Tamar. Others say that it could be that he was trying to let everyone know that I haven't forgotten, I hadn't forgotten how she was done. I hadn't forgotten what's happened here. And, there's still those feelings that are there. Maybe it's some more plotting and planning and whatever that's going on. But whatever the case may be, he had 3 sons. It don't say anything much about them other than the daughter. It says she was a woman of beautiful appearance, and so got her daddy's genes. And Absalom dwelt 2 full years in Jerusalem, but did not see the king's face. So he's allowed to come back, which that should be enough to tell him that I'm not going to be executed for what I did. I've been allowed to come back. I can live my life, but I can't go before the king. And he should have left well enough alone, I suppose, but he let that eat at him as well. And so Absalom sends for Joab, and Joab had played a part, in getting him to come back, to be able to come back. And so he thinks, well, here's a person I can talk to that can get me to come and be able to see David. And so he sent for Joab to send him to the king, but he would not come to him. He did that twice. He did it again. He wouldn't come to him. Why do you suppose Joab wouldn't come? It doesn't really say, does it? Do what? You get yourself in that position, trying to be the go-between, and one side or another or both sides might wind up getting mad at you before it's all said and done. If you've ever tried to get 2 different people to work out their differences, sometimes you can get shot at as well. And so you have do what?
Since I know the rest
right?
of the story, I say Joab didn't like him to start with.
Okay.
Had no reason to want to have him back.
Because he did wind up going against the king's command and
He said, don't kill him, but he did it.
He took it into his own hands because he thought he knew what was best. Yes, and so yeah.
He didn't like him.
So yeah, that's true. You look at the end result where Joab does kill him, but again. But at the same time, David said, "Don't kill him." But he thought he was probably doing what was best for David. David can't bring himself to kill his own son, so I'll do it for him. I'll do the dirty work. Because he could see what was going on there with Absalom trying to take over the throne. David's looking at it from a father's point of view. This is my son, and he's done wrong, but David had been forgiven, and he wanted to forgive Absalom, but that wasn't going to happen. And so we'll see more of that next week in the death of Absalom. But yeah, I don't think there's any love lost there. He allowed him to come back, maybe trying. One thing too with your enemies. You can keep them close so you can keep an eye on them sometimes. If he's out in the countryside or another city, you can't see as much, but if he's there, you can kind of keep an eye on him too. But whatever the case may be, Joab does not come. And you're Absalom, good-looking Absalom, the Absalom that everyone praises, and Joab doesn't come once, doesn't come twice. So what do? You get his attention. And so he says to his servants, this is Absalom, verse 30, "See, Joab's field is near mine. He has barley there. Go and set it on fire." And Absalom's servants set the field on fire. One thing you got to say, Absalom has some loyal servants, doesn't he? Whether it's killing someone or setting a field on fire of an important person, he is, he's got some loyal servants there with him. That got Joab's attention. And so Joab wasn't coming before, but then Joab arose, came to Absalom's house, and said to him, "Why have your servants set my field on fire? What in the world are you doing?" And Absalom answered Joab, "Look, I sent to you, saying, 'Come here, so that I may send you to the king to say, why have I come from Geshur? But it would have been better for me to still be there.'" All I wanted was to be able to go and see the king. In other words, his father. I like the way he words it, to the king. It'd be better for me to still be there. What good did it do for me to come here if I can't see him? Now, therefore, let me see the king's face. But if there's iniquity in me, let him execute me. If I deserve to die, let him kill me. I think he knows that's not going to happen, but he's just saying, let me see his face. If I need to be killed, let me be killed, but I want to see his face. So Joab went to the king and told him, and at this point, he goes on to the king. And when he had called for Absalom, he came to the king and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king. Then the king kissed Absalom. So what does that mean? Glad to see it. He's still his child. He loves him, and you love your children no matter what kind of mess they may make of their lives at times or what they've done, they're still your youngest, and you want the best for them. And I mean, he wanted Absalom to get his life in order and be what he should be and all that. There's still that love that's there. Anything else in that kiss? Would it be, I think he said forgiveness? And maybe more of a, from any kind of consequence. You're not going to be executed. I'm sure when Joab came, he explained what Absalom said, like, if you need to execute me, execute me. And by kissing him, he's showing that the acceptance of him, that he would not be executed, and that he's free to go and free to live his life. Just let bygones be bygones, as bad as they may have been. And so it sounds like things are getting better, doesn't it? But are they? Not at all. You go on to the next chapter, in chapter 15. And after this, it happened that Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. You ever see like on movies on TV, they'll have the big production when a king comes through, or royalty of some sort, prince or whatever it may be. And so he made a big production whenever he went through town. I mean, you have 50 people, 50 men running ahead of you, announcing Absalom is coming, and for the chariots and the horses to come through, it got people's attention. Not everyone rode in a chariot being pulled by horses, much less with 50 men in front of it. And so he drew attention, and it made him look like royalty. It made him look like someone important. And he got his face before the public. Now, Absalom would rise early and stand beside the way to the gate. What took place at the gate of cities back then? Anything? Yeah, yeah. People went in, people went out, and some stayed by there. Yeah. It's a place of judgment a lot of times. I mean, you think about, you'd have some of the, now you can go in Jack's and see all the old men sitting around the table talking. But no, you'd have like some of the elders of the city would be there, and it could be a place of judgment, of being heard. And so he's there. And like you say, people are coming and going all the time. I mean, you want to get in the city, you go this way. You want to get out, you go that way. And so he would catch people coming and going. And he's sitting in a place where you'd expect maybe someone that could be a judge and be able to hear your case. And think about it, he's probably got his chariots parked right there, all his men around him, his whole entourage. He's dressed the part of royalty, and he's there in the place where you'd think of judgment as well. And so he's there early. And when people are coming to do their business, and he would get to looking and talking to people along the way, and I get accused of talking to too many people along the way and finding out their life stories, but you get to talking to people. Yeah, I mean, yeah, all kinds of different things that take place. And what'd you say? A politician? Oh yeah, kiss the babies, and what they didn't have cameras back then. There'll be a camera crew out there taking pictures. Yeah. It's all an ulterior motive. It's all politicking, like you said. I mean, he's winning the heart of the people. So he's out there. He'd ask people. He'd see people coming to be heard by the king. I mean, they come from all over to see if they could get a hearing with the king. And he'd ask them, "What city are you from?" You ever ask somebody where they're from, and you get the conversation with them? And I was talking to a man his retired Air Force, that could tell from his cap that he had on I think it was on Friday, and got to talking, and I asked him about his career and what he did, and about 20 minutes later, he was enjoying telling the story there because he appreciated someone thanking him for his service and asking some questions about it. And anyway, here he was asked, "Where are you from?" and getting some things. And then also he says, and he would say, "Your servant is from such and such a tribe of Israel." So, the conversation began. Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your case is good and right." Because the conversation continues when you open that door. Well, what brings you to Jerusalem? Well, I'm here to see the king. What's going on? Why do you need to see the king? Well, I have a case that needs to be settled. I'm having problems here. Done everything I could, and now I'm to the point of needing to talk to the king. And so Absalom would say, "Look, your case is good. It's right. But there's no deputy of the king to hear you. You're not going to get a hearing from the king. You know, I appreciate what you're going through. I appreciate your situation, and I feel your pain there. And Absalom said, oh, that I were made judge in the land, and everyone who had any suit or cause would come to me, then I would give him justice. As Jimmy said, Brother Jimmy said, that's politicking, isn't it? You know, you're not going to get anything from David. You're not going to get to hear it. But boy, if I was king, I'd listen to you. If he was king, do you think he'd listen to all those people that he said he'd listen to? You know, you understand when a politician promises you something, it's to get elected. It's surprising when some of them actually carry through. You're almost in shock when they carry through. I can think of certain situations where politicians have carried through on their promises, and the media is like, what are they doing? You know, you don't do that. You know, I'm thinking, well, you do if you're what you're supposed to be. And here, he's making promises to the people. He's not just saying, it'd be nice if I could be, but he's basically saying, if you make me king, or when I am king, then I'll care about you and I'll hear you where David will not. So they probably go in the city and maybe their case is not big enough, and you think about how many people want to come and see the king day in and day out, and how busy he would be. Even if he was trying to see everyone, you couldn't do it. Moses had that problem at one point and had to appoint some different ones as judges to take care of the situation. And he couldn't hear everyone. And so he comes back out of the city going back home, and I'm sure Absalom said, well, how'd it go? And, well, I didn't get to see the king. He said, you know, he could say, I told you so, and if I was king. And so you can see he's winning the hearts of the people. And it's not just one or two people. Verse 5 says, and so it was, whenever anyone came near to bow down to him, that he would put out his hand and take him and kiss him. That's a true politician, isn't it? I mean, he wouldn't just ignore them. I mean, sometimes you have people that are very rich and powerful, and they'll stick their nose up in there and walk on by, or just kind of shoo you away, or, you know, feel like you've made them dirty if you tried to touch them. But here, he wouldn't just shake a hand or smile and wave. He would put out his hand, take hold of them, and give them a kiss of greeting is what it, you know. We don't normally greet that way, but you can see, you know, he's just trying to say, like, you're my friend, and acceptance. In this manner, Absalom acted toward all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So anyone who was going to come to see the king saw Absalom first as they came into the city. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. What does that mean? What does that mean, he stole their heart? Okay. On page 28, at that top paragraph, it says, in the middle of that paragraph, it says, Bill T. Arnold explained, the heart in the Old Testament Hebrew is often the seat of one's intellect as well as one's emotions. Thus, rather than win the affections of the Israelites, Absalom stole their minds, that is, he deceived or duped them in order to overthrow David. I mean, he won their heart, but he won their minds. I mean, he had convinced them it was so. You know, we look at people that use propaganda. You know, you just keep repeating the same thing over and over and over again until you convince somebody that what's not true is true. And we've seen it in other countries. We're seeing some of that in our country as well. But that's what he's doing, just telling people, boy, I care about you. I would take your case. And again and again. I mean, and of course, I mean, they probably thought, wow, look at him. He's a beautiful, handsome young man, and kind of had that heart. But more importantly, he won their mind and won them over to him, thinking, man, David won't listen to us. But I sure wish Absalom, his son, could be king. Maybe one day he can be king. And so the word spread. I mean, those people go back home here, they go back home there, everywhere, and they tell their families. They said, you know, David wouldn't hear my case. I didn't get a chance to see him. But boy, his son Absalom was out there, and if anybody would make a good king, a good judge before the people, he would listen to us. He would hear our case, and he appreciates us. Did he really? No, I mean, I doubt that very seriously. But he convinced the people that he felt that way. And so he stole the hearts of the men of Israel, pulled it away from their allegiance to David. And in verse 7, the King James, well, I think it's the King James, New King James, in a few versions will say, now it came to pass after 40 years that Absalom said to the king, please let me go to Hebron and pay the vow which I have made to the Lord. Now, I think, like I know several versions, I think the New American Standard, the ESV, and some others put 4 years And I think that's probably more correct, that 4 years, because David only reigned 40 years total. He only reigned 40 years. And so that would kind of put some things in there. But after I think it's after 4 years rather than 40. That would make more sense with the story as well, but it fit in the time frame. But quite some time had passed. And so Absalom says to David, "Let me go to Hebron and pay the vow which I made to the Lord. For your servant took a vow while I dwelt at Geshur in Syria, saying, if the Lord indeed brings me back to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord." Is he telling the truth? I mean, he may have made some kind of vow to God, trying to get God to do what he wanted to do. I don't know. But as far as being serious about it, yeah, that's not what's going on here. But he's telling David, look, I made this vow. I need to go take care of this vow. I promise the Lord that if you'll just let me get back in Jerusalem, I'll serve you. And by the way, we don't will and deal with God. He should have said, God, no matter what happens, I'll serve you. Not if you'll let this happen, or that happen. Because we can will and deal with God too. God, if you'll work this situation out in my life, I'll serve you faithfully. Well, what if it doesn't work out the way we want? Will we still serve him? We should. And the king said to him, go in peace. So he arose and went to Hebron. And he's on a mission. I mean, he's not innocent in all this. Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then you shall say, Absalom reigns in Hebron. And so he's trying to take over the throne. And he's convinced he will be able to take over the throne. What's wrong with his thinking? I mean, what's he not figuring into his thinking? Do what? God. Okay. That's the one little thing that's really the biggest thing of all. He may have looked at it and said, I've got good military strength, I've got the heart of the people. And he may have said, well, I made a vow to God or whatever, but God knows his heart, he knows his mind, he knows who he is. God had anointed David to be king, and guess who's going to be king? David will be until God says otherwise. And so he didn't figure God into the equation, and you're not going to win a victory against God. I still think back to with Saul being anointed king, and then David was anointed king in his place, but David couldn't bring himself to kill Saul because he was God's anointed one. And, again, he didn't want him to die by his hand. And there's respect for the one God had chosen. Even when his heart had departed, David was very careful there. And Absalom should have realized, as much as he wanted to be king, as much as he was at odds with David, that if God had anointed David, then it wasn't for Absalom to be king. But yet, people don't always think that way. You're talking about the devil being in his heart. I mean, you see him following the devil's leading rather than God's leading here. And he's trying to work it out. He's got the military strength there. He's got the people's heart, but he doesn't have God. That's right. He should have backed away from it and said, look, I want to be king, but God's already appointed my father. And if it's God's will, God's will one day for me to be king, I will. But that's not what he did. He did not have we look at the negatives of David, but you see the positives that make him a man after God's own heart, the respect he had for God's anointed. Even when Saul had tried to kill David, even when Saul's heart had fallen away from God, David was still respectful when he had opportunities to kill him, not to. And then here Absalom is looking for every opportunity, trying to make opportunities. You see him killing his brother in that way, and now looking for opportunities to take David off the throne. He's not looking at it as a father-son relationship. I mean, he talks about the king, and I think that shows his true heart. I mean, it's not like he's looking at him as his father anymore. But again, maybe that just doesn't matter to him. Family in that way does not. But Absalom went 200 men invited from Jerusalem, and they went along innocently and did not know anything. Sometimes you can get dragged into some situations that you don't realize what you're getting into, and it seems like some of these men were drug into something they didn't realize what all was happening. I mean, they may have liked Absalom, and again, he could put on the politician's front, and he could win the hearts of the people, and they may not have seen his true heart. They evidently didn't know his true intentions, But still, he's got a following that's there. And he sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city. And while he offered sacrifices, so he's trying to get everyone involved. He's trying to get David's counselor involved, trying to get in every which way he can. The conspiracy grew strong, for the people with Absalom continually increased in number. And so the opposition's coming, and he's got it built up. And just from a worldly standpoint, you'd think David is in big trouble now. But like you say, put God into the equation, and it's not as much trouble as you might think it would be. But still, there's going to be some terrible things that happen along the way. And in fact, you get to in that chapter, I'm trying to see where we start in the next one exactly. Oh, it picks up in chapter 18. But in verse 13 of chapter 15, a messenger came to David saying, the hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom. So David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, arise, let us flee, or we shall not escape from Absalom. Make haste to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly and bring disaster upon us and strike the city with the edge of the sword. David didn't want to die. He didn't want others to die as well. And so the king's servant said to the king, we are your servants, ready to do whatever my lord the king commands. And the king went out with all his household after him, but the king left 10 women, concubines, to keep the house. And the king went out with all the people after him and stopped at the outskirts. And so he leaves, a few of the concubines behind to take care of the castle or the house there. Then all his servants passed before him, and it lists all the ones that were there that passed before him. And in verse 19, the king said to Ittai the Gittite, why are you going with us? Return and remain with the king, for you are a foreigner and also an exile from your own people. And he kind of goes back and forth there. But verse 21, Ittai answered the king and said, as the Lord lives and as my lord the king lives, surely in whatever place my lord the king shall be, whether in death or life, even there also your servant be. And so he allows him to go with him. In verse 23, it says, all the country wept with a loud voice. All the people crossed over. The king himself also crossed over the brook Kidron. All the people crossed over toward the way of the wilderness. And it mentions burying the Ark of the Covenant. They set down the Ark of the Covenant. It goes on there. But they're fleeing the city. I mean, everybody's getting out of Dodge, getting out of the city, out of Jerusalem, and trying to save himself, but save the people with him and not let anything bad happen. Verse 30, the David went up by the ascent of the Mount of Olives and wept as he went up, his head covered, and went barefoot. I mean, the humble heart, the weepiness there over what's taking place. And I'm sure he's weeping not only about himself, but over and his loved ones there, but over what Absalom is doing. And verse 21, then someone told David, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, O Lord, I pray, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. And so what does David do? He's having to flee because his own son's trying to take over the throne, and everybody seems to be turning against him every which way you go. And it says in verse 32, now it happened when David had come to the top of the mountain where he worshiped God. He goes to the top of the mountain where he worships God there. And there was Hushai the Archite coming to meet him with his robe torn, dust on his head. And then I was trying to find where I wanted to get down to. And so he sends that one that comes to him on into the city. And then Absalom comes to Jerusalem. And we might want to stop at that point because it's getting over into the next lesson. I don't know, but you get the point. Absalom has won the heart of the people, a lot of the people. He's got a good group of people that can fight for him. He has people set up throughout the land to let them know when Absalom has become king. And they'll think, oh boy, Absalom's king. He's the one that listened to us. So David is running. He's fleeing. Just got just a few people there in the house left. He leaves because he's trying to save his life and the life of his family as well and try not to bring any harm upon Jerusalem. But as he leaves the city, Absalom comes into Jerusalem. And so we're set for a big fight. We're set for some terrible things to happen. Any comments at this point? Look on page 29, as we got about 2 minutes left. On page 29 in the book, Applications. Sin must not be ignored, nor should it be accepted as inevitable. The problem between David and Absalom began when the king failed to properly respond to Amnon's actions and refused to punish his firstborn. This does not excuse the behavior of Absalom. His retaliation was also sinful. Nevertheless, had David dealt with Amnon properly, the situation with Absalom might have been different. So, sometimes when we try to ignore things, sweep it under the rug, or just hope it'll go away, it can cause more difficulties. And again, that doesn't take away from the responsibility of Absalom, but David should have dealt with some situations there as well. Although David eventually allowed Absalom to return to his court, the forgiveness he extended to his own son hardly resembles the complete forgiveness God expects his followers to grant to others. We would do well to remember what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, "For if you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses." To be forgiven, we must be willing to forgive others. And so, again, a lot at play here. We could sit there and analyze that in a lot of different ways. David should have handled things to begin with, but then Absalom handled it, but he didn't handle it in the right way. And now both of them are trying to come together, but not coming together. But you see where David's trying, ultimately, he may not be doing everything perfect, but I think he has more trying to do the right thing than you would think of with Absalom as well. Absalom's effort to steal the kingdom from David remind us of what wicked individuals will do to get their way. The tactics he used remain common political ploys. Even so, selfishness must be avoided. Making this point, Paul urged, "Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for your own interest, but also for the interest of others." That does not sum up Absalom, does it? Just the opposite of that. Any other comments? I was going to get into some discussion things, but we are out of time. You can think about what steps should individuals take when attempting to resolve personal conflict. What can we learn about repentance and forgiveness? How can we combat self-seeking in the home, in the workplace, in the church? So those are the things we may want to think about. We may touch on some of those next week. If there are no other comments, we'll take up next week with Absalom and his ultimate death.